So the PSA Dagger build is finally complete. Got the extended mag release that I told you guys I was going to get, and just installed the Timney Alpha Glock trigger today. Let's see how she performs. Oh, I like this trigger. Welcome back to Sawtooth Tactical and the final episode of the Gucciest PSA Dagger build series. So I've been calling this build series the Gucci Glock on a budget because the PSA Dagger is a Gen 3 Glock 19 clone, and it takes Gen 3 Glock parts, and that has been proven because I've switched out a bunch of parts on this to make what I've got now. This episode is specifically the Timney Alpha Glock trigger for Gen 3 and 4, and also the extended teardrop mag release, which we'll talk about as well. I hope you guys have been following along this build series. I hope you've been enjoying it. I will put a link to the entire series down here, but this has been a very fun build. So before we get started, make sure you're subscribed to Sawtooth Tactical. Hit that bell notification so you don't miss any future content. We put out 3 videos every week. I think we had a lot of fun here. I hope you guys enjoy it too. Let's get started. So the only 2 things I wasn't real happy about with the PSA Dagger frame was the mag release. It was kind of sharp and small. And the trigger, while it wasn't terrible, it wasn't fantastic. This Timney trigger, oh my God, it is quite an upgrade. I like it. So this build series, like I said, Gucci Glock on a budget. Well, my whole point with this, I wanted to build out, a Gucci Glock, a custom Glock 19. Well, there's a lot of options on the market ever since Glock let its Gen 3 patent go. Tons of companies make Gen 3 Glock parts. And I found that the PSA Dagger frame seemed like the best bang for the buck to get started on that. Well, along with the PSA Dagger frame, on their website, they have so many options for slides and barrels. So I went with a Dagger slide and barrel as well. This is the SWR slide, cut for RMR optic with a titanium nitride gold threaded barrel. Slide cuts, very cool slide. They've got tons of other options on their website. Check it out if you're building a Gen 3 Glock 19 clone. They've just got tons of different slides, barrel options, different optics cuts. A veritable smorgasbord of tactical options, which is very cool. Well, after using the Dagger frame, which I'm very happy with, I think that the ergonomics of it, in my opinion, are much better than an actual Glock. Glocks kind of feel like holding a 2x4 to me a little bit. This one actually has fantastic ergonomics. It's got the single, finger groove, very, very high undercut under the trigger guard, and a low bore axis, just like a Glock 19. It just seems to push your hand up into the gun very high. Also with this lip on the bottom here where there's the magazine well, same thing. It's just really easy to get a really good solid grip on this gun. So I think the Dagger frame is a fantastic place to start. Again, there's slides and barrels, so many options. Because it's the RMR cut, I put a Holosun 407C on it. Well, with my favorite pistol mounted light, the Streamlight TLR1 HL. Had to do the matching, flat dark earth color. Well, this week I installed probably my favorite part so far, and that is this. This is the Timney Alpha competition use only, they say, Glock trigger for Gen 3 and 4 Glocks. I also installed this. This is the teardrop mag release from Glock store. Because if you guys remember in episode 1, I said the only thing that I didn't really like about this frame was the magazine release. And this mag release makes a huge difference. I wanted to go with the black one, but they were out of stock. So I went with gold to match the barrel. And I'm glad I did. I think it looks fantastic. So we're going to go up close and take a look at the new parts. But take a look at this trigger pull first. Compared to a standard Glock trigger, it's really, really good. It's very light. It's actually really easy to pull right through it if you're not careful. So I do understand where they say competition use only. Although, I've been running the Apex Tactical flat face trigger in my M&P for quite some time. It is also a very light trigger pull. But it does have, a very defined wall, and I've gotten used to it. And I feel like it's very safe after putting a lot of rounds through it. I feel like this trigger will be the same way. You see that a little bit of take up there? There is a defined wall and a nice crisp break. Much more of a crisp break than you get on a standard Glock trigger. Now, the reset is a little bit long, but it puts you right back at that wall for the break. It is a huge upgrade to any standard Glock trigger. But it's even a big upgrade to the trigger that was on the Dagger, which in my opinion was already better than a stock Glock trigger. But let's take a look at these upgrades up close, see what I mean. Hopefully you guys will agree with me. I think this Timney trigger is pretty sweet. So this PSA Dagger is pretty awesome. I'm loving this build. Gen 3 Glock clone. I got a slide with cuts in it. RMR cut, obviously I put a Holosun 407C on it. Streamlight TLR1HL. It's got the threaded titanium nitride barrel. And now the Timney Alpha trigger. Oh my God, it makes all the difference. This trigger's sweet. So here we see the Timney Alpha Glock trigger. Now let's take a look at what it comes in here, because I do feel like you get a pretty good bang for your buck with this Timney trigger. And most aftermarket Glock triggers, generally you just get a different trigger shoe and a different trigger bar for the most part. There are some that are full kits where you get your striker block assembly and things like that. But this is my original trigger in here, and I'll show you the difference between the Timney trigger shoe and this one. So the original trigger on the PSA Dagger kind of is like that. It's that hinge design, kind of like the original Smith & Wesson M&P trigger. And it's got a standard Gen 3 Glock trigger bar. Well, you remove all of that, including your trigger spring that goes in your trigger housing. This is an extra trigger return spring that comes with the Alpha trigger, depending on what kind of connector you're running. And then it also comes with a little tool set, which I was so impatient to get this installed, I forgot to even use their tool set, but I got it done without it anyway. Now, YouTube's new rules, I don't think I could take this gun apart on screen, so through the magic of video editing. So I just wanted to show you guys inside here, because the cool thing about the Timney trigger is it actually changes up the whole way your trigger works. Instead of just having your standard cruciform that pulls back on your striker here, which adds a lot of weight to your trigger pull, because your trigger pull is actually that cruciform pulling back this striker. That's part of your trigger pull, and then it hits your disconnect, or your connector comes down and lets your striker go. That's how a standard Glock trigger works. Well, with the Timney trigger, for one thing, you see that it actually resets itself forward, whereas a normal Glock trigger, after you fire a shot, it's dead to the back until you re-rack your slide. Well, this one doesn't do that. For one, it's got that trigger return spring in there, which is what this is here. They give you two of them depending on what kind of connector you're using, but that pushes your trigger back forward. Now for two, it does have its own trigger bar, and you see that the cruciform is different. It's just got a bar across here instead of the whole cross there, And then they've got their own trigger assembly that drops into your trigger housing. And you can see right there that this runs over that. And when it hits your connector back there, it pushes down on that. So when your slide reciprocates, your striker actually catches on that sear right there. So your trigger pull has nothing to do with cocking your striker. It ends up being a pre-cocked striker. All your trigger pull does is drop that sear and let the striker go. And so because of that, you end up with a much lighter, smoother trigger pull. And I'm sure it'll even smooth out more over time. I could probably polish this and make it smoother. Maybe polish the striker block assembly, make it smoother in that way, because that has to do with your trigger pull as well. That's what this rides over when you're pulling your trigger back. So all of those things make a big difference. When I did the Apex trigger in my Smith & Wesson M&P, that became so much smoother with the Apex striker block. But you can see, just to give you an example of the difference here. So here's the M&P Apex trigger. Very short reset, very, very short break. The take up on it is extremely smooth. Now, this Timney trigger is not quite as good as that Apex trigger, but it is still very good. So again, here you have your take up, not as smooth as the Apex, but shorter of a take up, defined wall, and a very, very crisp break. Your reset is a little bit long, but it does come right back to the wall. You see there where the trigger is on my finger there? When the slide reciprocates, it actually pushes your trigger back a little bit farther. And so that's what makes your reset a little longer. And that reset does have to do with that trigger return spring I showed you. But it is a huge upgrade over the standard trigger. Both of these guns have great triggers in them for being striker fired guns, and I'm extremely happy with them. Obviously, I just love doing custom pistols. They're really, really fun. This build was a very fun build to do. So the other thing I want to talk about here is this. This is the Teardrop extended mag release. Comes from Glock store. You can see there, they've got it in all these colors. Like I said, I wanted to get black and they were out of stock. But the gold actually matches the barrel, or the titanium nitride barrel really well. Kind of gives it a little more of that Gucci look. And man, it sure makes it easier to actuate. The original mag release that was on here, I didn't like. It was small, it was sharp, and I had to change up my grip in order to actuate it. Whereas with this mag release, I don't have to change my grip at all. It's easy to get my thumb on, has a lot more surface area, and it just looks a lot better. It's made out of machined aluminum. Installing it was very easy. I recommend this and this trigger to anybody looking to upgrade their Gen 3 Glocks. So now that the build is finished, got to test it out with some good hollow points. Make sure that it can run defensive ammo, because it's a Glock. It definitely should. Glocks are known to be reliable. But you just want to make sure that it's going to feed and cycle the defensive ammo that you're going to use. So let's try some Hornady Critical Duty and see how it goes. Seems to work perfectly. So a big part of the fun of firearms to me is customizing, upgrading, building firearms. And that's why I do these build series in my channel. This is the 4th build series. This M&P was the first one. Started with a stock M&P, built it out to what I just showed you. Then I did the Aero Precision EPC 9. That was a full build from stripped receivers. My 300 Blackout build, full build from stripped receivers. Still waiting on the suppressor for that one. And I kept telling you guys I was going to do a Glock 19 build. Well, this is it in all of its glory. I think the PSA Dagger is a great starting point for a Glock build. one of the really fun things about Glocks is just like AR-15s, because that Gen 3 patent, they let it run out, there are so many parts on the market. And there's such an aftermarket support for Glock that you can literally build your Glock any way you want it. I mean, this doesn't really look a whole lot like a regular Glock 19. It's, in my opinion, a lot better. And while I do have, about $1,000, a little more than $1,000 into it at this point, the base gun, which was this frame and this, slide and barrel with all the cuts, the RMR cut, and the threaded barrel, was less than $500, which is about $100 less than a stock Glock 19. So a PSA Dagger is a great starting place if you want to do a custom Glock build. Obviously, just the accessories, the optic, the light, the trigger, cost doubled the cost from the actual gun itself. But still cheaper than it would have been to buy a stock Glock and do what I did with my stock M&P and get the slide milled, get cuts in it, all these different things, change out triggers and add everything else to it, optics and that. It would have been quite a bit more expensive, many hundreds of dollars more expensive, especially if you want to get the frame to where the ergonomics are the way you like it. Maybe you love the ergonomics on a stock Glock. I think they work perfectly fine. I've shot a lot of Glocks and I like them. They're great guns, hence why I wanted to do a Glock build. But I do feel that the Dagger frame does have better ergonomics than your regular Glock does, and that's why so many people send their Glocks out to get stippled and to get undercuts cutting them and all of that stuff. Glock perfection, but everyone has to change their Glocks to make it actual perfection for them. Hence why I started with something like this to get the perfection that I wanted, and I do believe that this is Glock perfection at this point. Now, everyone's idea of perfection is going to be different. This was my vision for a perfect Gucci Glock for me. I absolutely love it. I've put a lot of rounds through it by now, and the thing is running really, really good. I'm very happy with it. So I hope this maybe motivates or inspires you to go out and do your own kind of Glock build. Start with a Dagger frame or any other frame on the market. There's tons of options for slides, barrels, triggers, everything else. I recommend that anybody that's into firearms get into building firearms, upgrading and customizing firearms. I think that that's a huge part of the fun that firearms are. Now, firearms have to be taken seriously, and you have to be very safe with your guns, follow all the rules of gun safety, all that, practice, train, make sure that you end up being very proficient with your firearms. But there's no reason that we can't have fun with them too. And by building them, customizing them, is that fun part, but it also makes it a more effective firearm. The optic makes it faster and more accurate. The light makes it so that you can use it at night in a home defense type of situation. Threaded barrel, I could put a comp or a suppressor on here at some point. The trigger makes you much more accurate and fast as well. Extended slide release makes it easier and quicker to do those reloads. So all these fun upgrades that add to the aesthetic and the appeal of the firearm and just personalizing it and making it yours also make it a more effective firearm. It is a beautiful day for shooting out here. I am really happy with the way this Dagger build turned out. Yeah, works great. So now that the build is done, I did have to run some good hollow point defensive ammunition through it. Make sure that it'll run the ammo that I'm going to use. I've been using Federal HST hollow points in my other defensive handguns, but my local gun store is out of those right now. So I thought I'd try out some Hornady Critical Defense. Put a magazine of that through this gun. Of course, it ran them perfectly, as any Glock should, but that's good to know. That way I know that what I'm keeping in it, in case I need to use it in a defensive situation, will work when I need it to. Make sure you do the same. Of course, practice with your regular Full Metal Jacket ball ammo, but just make sure that you run some defensive ammo that you're going to use through it too, because you don't want to be surprised the minute that you actually have to use your gun that it jams, doesn't feed, doesn't cycle the ammo that you're using defensively. That would be a really bad day. But anyway, I love building out these custom pistols, custom ARs, just custom guns in general. I think it's a really fun hobby, pastime, and they're very useful as well. So, like I said, I hope this inspires you guys to do the same. Let me know down in the comments what kind of builds you have done. If you've done like Glock builds, tell me which frames, slides, barrels, triggers, those kinds of things you've used. I would love to hear from you guys. If you enjoyed this, drop me a like, share this video. And from Sawtooth Tactical, stay strapped or get clapped.